The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
I begin in the name of God of Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, the God of Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them all. The God who is the most gracious, ever merciful, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May peace and blessing of God Almighty be upon you all. I'm honored and humbled to stand before you today as a member of Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Muslims who believe that the Messiah has come. We join together in prayer before our Creator. I will now recite a few verses from the Islamic Holy Book of Holy Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praise belongs to God, Lord of all the worlds, the gracious, the merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship, you alone do we ask for help. Guide us on the right path, the path of those on whom you have bestowed your blessings, those who have not incurred your displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. Verily, God commands you to make over the trust to those entitled to them, and that when you judge between men, you judge with justice. And surely excellent is that with which God admonishes you. God is all-hearing, all-seeing. O who you believe, be strict in observing justice, and be witness for God, even though it be against yourself or against parents and kindred. Whether he be rich or poor, God is more regardful of them than you. Therefore, follow not low desires, so that you may be able to act equitably. And if you conceal the truth or evade it, then remember that God is well aware of what you do. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Dr. Kamal Ahmad, Director of Public Affairs, Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, Minnesota Chapter, Nusrat Mosque in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll.
Having kids, and then they all got married and had kids.
Journal of the House, 94th Session, 2025, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, February 19th, 2025.
If there's no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of House files.
Second reading, House File number 6.
Second reading.
Second reading, House File number 75.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 1218 through 1331.
First reading, House Files 1218 through 1331. Report from the Committee of Rules and Legislative Administration.
Niska from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, February 24th, 2025, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bill. House File number 14.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 20. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 20, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to government data practices.
Recognize the author, Representative Niska, who will explain the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. House File 20 is a very small change in the law. Adds 2 words to the Minnesota Data Practices Act, our Sunshine Law, but it serves 3 very important goals. The first is that it corrects a statutory interpretation error by the Minnesota Supreme Court from 2022 in the case of Energy Policy Advocates versus Minnesota. In that case, the Minnesota Supreme Court, on a 4-3 decision, held that data on individuals could include data that isn't on any individuals. We had a dissent by the former Speaker, Justice Thiessen, who called that interpretation Orwellian, and he is 100% right. Anything that is protected in the Data Practices Act as data on individuals needs to be data on individuals. That's the kind of data where a privacy interest is implicated that would justify the treatment of data as data on individuals, which results in special privacy protection under the Act. When that is not done, that disrupts the balanced approach of the Data Practices Act. Restoring that balanced approach is the second important goal that is served by this bill. Government transparency needs to be an absolute value in our democracy. We cannot hold our elected officials accountable, including those in such important positions as the Attorney General's office, unless we know what's going on in that office. That's the same at the governor's office. It's the same with every government office in the state of Minnesota. But we protect individual privacy, and that is why we protect private data on individuals. The problem is that the Minnesota Supreme Court's decision extends that protection to data that does not implicate the privacy of any individual. My bill protects individual privacy rights, protects the privacy of data on individual members, on individual Minnesotans, but it does not provide special secrecy to the Attorney General's office, which is unfortunately the current law under the Data Practices Act, under the interpretation of Energy Policy Advocates versus Ellison. And the third and most important goal is that it enhances transparency and accountability of our important public office, the Attorney General's office. Across the country, there are nonprofits, companies, law firms, dark money funds that are all trying to influence Attorney General's offices from both sides of the aisle. It's happening in Minnesota. In our current Attorney General's office, we have attorneys that are being privately funded to pursue political goals, and that data is being shielded by the misinterpretation of the Data Practices Act from Energy Policy Advocates versus Ellison. The public needs to know who is influencing our government. Who is influencing all of our government, including our Attorney General's office? We need to know who is influencing them, how, and why. Don Gemberling, one of the key drafters of the Data Practices Act, a guru on this topic who served in the Department of Administration for years and years and years and wrote advisory opinions, testified on this bill in the House. And he said that the current distorted interpretation of the Data Practices Act sets the Attorney General's office apart from every other office subject to the Data Practices Act. It's separate from sets it apart from the governor's office, it sets it apart from every prosecutor's office, and creates a situation where there is more secrecy in the Attorney General's office than in any other office. Members, this is an easy yes vote. We're adding 2 words to our statute books that protect our democracy, that protect our transparency, the right of the people of Minnesota to know what's happening in their office. This is an easy yes vote. Vote for the people of Minnesota to know what's happening in our state government, regardless of what the party bosses say. Vote for the people, vote green.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you. Today I rise to make a motion to refer this bill back to state government. In listening to the author of the legislation, I heard him say that the AG's office is set aside from all other offices. And as state government is the committee of jurisdiction for the Attorney General's office, and because these data requests do incur costs to the offices, I believe that as the Finance Committee of Jurisdiction, this bill should be referred and should have been referred to state government. That's my motion, and I'd like a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Do I see 15 hands? I do see 15 hands. Representative Cleavorn makes a motion to refer to state gov. Discussion, I would recognize Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, this bill's language is in section 13.65 subdivision 1, which does not fall under the purview of state government finance. So members, I would urge a no vote because it's not in the same chapter of law. We don't need to see it because it's in chapter 13, I believe, or Attorney General's. Yeah, so we don't need to see this. It is not germane. It's not included in our committee's jurisdiction. So I urge you to vote no.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Cleavorn, I appreciate your effort here. There is a specific part of Chapter 13 that deals specifically with the Attorney General's office. Lucky for you and lucky for everybody on State Gov, it prevents, there's no need for it to go to State Gov Finance because that specific piece is the bill that Representative Niska has brought us. It pertains directly to the Attorney General's office and his authorities under Chapter 13 and how he's to operate under Chapter 13. So there's no need at all for it to go to State Gov.
I recognize Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The Attorney General's office has plenty of money to deal with data practices requests. They have to deal with data practices requests whether this bill gets passed or whether it doesn't. It's just talking about which category they put the data in that they review. It's going to cost the exact same amount. Any attorney who's done a document review understands this. Whether documents are privileged or not, you still have to do the review. This bill simply changes the classification. It says that certain data cannot be hidden when it doesn't involve a when it does not involve an individual, that does not create any additional cost in the Attorney General's office. But I have good news, even if it does. The Attorney General's office has plenty of money and plenty of employees under their current budget to deal with any data practice requests. In 2025, the Attorney General's office is estimated to have 433.7 FTEs, which is a 34% increase since 2019. In the Administrative Operations Department specifically, it is projected to have 73.87 FTEs, an increase since 2022 of from 43.4 to 73.87. They have plenty of people, they have plenty of money to deal with the data practices requests. This bill simply takes the Attorney General's office back to the interpretation of the Data Practices Act that existed for 40 years before the current Attorney General changed the interpretation and then got a whole bunch more staff. They don't need more money to make sure that the people know what's happening in the Attorney General's office. The price of democracy is not too high, members. We don't need to refer this back to the State Government Finance Committee. Vote no.
I recognize the maker of the motion, Representative Cleavorn.
Thank you very much. I would like for everyone to understand that the Attorney General holds a lot of information in the investigations that are conducted through the Attorney General's office, whether it's nonprofits, companies, or individuals. Oftentimes, those cases are large and they contain a great deal of personal information. I would encourage you to vote yes on this motion because we want to make sure that we are protecting the data of your companies and any personal information that might accidentally be released. And that takes time, energy, and effort so that the documents can all be reviewed one by one to make sure that only the data that should be released is being released. I encourage you to vote yes on the motion. It belongs in state government.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Seeing 65 yeas, 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 20.
Third reading. Is there any discussion? I call on the member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just heard a few minutes ago in his opening remarks, Representative Niska described this as a simple bill that changes just two little words, and I think he was meaning to suggest that it isn't that big of a change. It's just two little words, but we know that little bills can have big consequences. I, for instance, heard Representative Curran say the other day that if you change one word in a bill, a may to a shall, you could have a really big consequence. And I think that this bill actually does have a big consequence from two little words. It means by changing these two little words that many lawyers in the Attorney General's office are going to have to review a lot of data and decide if it complies with the law, if it needs to be made public. And it may come as a shock to you non-lawyers in the room, but lawyers generally don't work for free. They generally ask to be paid for their work. And so this bill, I believe, will have a cost. And, you know, I'm not sure that we know right now what that cost is. We don't have that information before the body. I don't think that was discussed in the committee hearing. I don't think it's been any materials before the body. It's really frustrating. If only there was a way for us to know before we vote on the bill how much it costs. Someone should come up with something like that. Like, I think we could call it maybe a fiscal note, right? Where they would come and tell us how much the bill costs. Actually, of course, that does exist, and a fiscal note has been requested on this bill, and I had checked with nonpartisan staff, and it has been completed. So here we are. Representative Niska is asking us to vote on a bill for which we don't know if it has a cost, and if it doesn't have a cost, how much that cost is. I think he knows it has a cost. In fact, I heard him say the Attorney General has plenty of people and plenty of money, and I heard him say that the price of democracy is not too high just a minute ago, which suggests to me that Representative Niska knows that this bill actually does cost some significant amount of money, which is unfortunate because Rule 4.10 under the House rules says that any bill that directly, substantially, and specifically affects any present or future financial obligation, budget policy, or revenue of the state must, and then goes on to say, be referred to the Committee of Jurisdiction, which Representative Cleavorn just attempted to do, after which it must be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. So, Madam Speaker, I would move that this bill be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and I would ask for a roll call vote.
Representative Stevenson has made a motion to re-refer the bill. A roll call being requested. I see 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, I wonder if Representative Torkelson would yield to a question.
He will yield to a question. Representative Stevenson.
Chair Torkelson, my question to you is this. Do you believe that a bill that has an open fiscal note, a fiscal note that has not been returned, should be brought to the floor for a vote without a stop in Ways and Means?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Stevenson, for your question. In this case, I don't believe it needs to come. It's quite obvious that the duties outlined within this bill, even with the two-word change, are well within the purview of the Attorney General's office, the work they normally do on a day-to-day basis and need to do. And I do not believe that this needs to come to Ways and Means. It's easily absorbed in the Attorney General's rather large and rather significantly expanded budget.
Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think it isn't really a question of whether they can absorb the cost. It's a question of does it have a cost? Because if it does, the rule plainly says that it needs to go to Ways and Means. You know, it's just unfortunate that Representative Niska and the members who are bringing this bill forward are trying to rush this bill, trying to avoid process, skipping steps. I'm sure this sounds familiar to my friends on the other side who are here. I think some of you have made those arguments before. I hope that you would abide by them today and join me in voting to refer this bill to the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Stevenson, for pointing out that many lawyers have to review data practice requests, and that would be, your motion would be a good motion if this was a different bill. If this was the bill where we were for the first time making the Attorney General's office subject to the Data Practices Act. But it's not. The Attorney General's office is today subject to the Data Practices Act. Any request that goes to the Attorney General's office has to be reviewed. I sure hope that Representative Cleavorn, in referencing the need to review documents carefully, isn't suggesting that the Attorney General's office right now is shirking its responsibilities under the Data Practices Act when it gets data requests. I sure hope that's not what you're suggesting, and I don't think that's what you're suggesting, and that's why, Representative Stevenson, your motion does not is inappropriate. It does not. This bill does not need to be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. The lawyers who have to review data practice requests are doing that today about any data request that comes to the Attorney General's office. This just tells them that data that before you were putting in this pile, you have to put in this pile. That's all it does. It doesn't create any additional data practice requests. It doesn't create any additional burden on those lawyers. All it does is remove the burden on democracy that's imposed by the Attorney General's reinterpretation that he went all the way to the Supreme Court to protect information from public view, to hide information about what's going on in that office. So Democrats can delay all they want on preventing the people's right to know what's happening in the Attorney General's office, but this is an important issue of transparency, and frankly, I think it's important to the people of Minnesota to see what side do the Democrats stand on. Do they stand on the side of the people and the people's right to know? Do they stand on the side of democracy? Or do they stand on the side of their party bosses who are telling them to vote against this bill, who are telling them to delay this bill? That's the question before the body. Vote no.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
State your point of order.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska knows that he's out of order under motives.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll just be brief and say that I think Representative Niska is trying to have it both ways now. He's saying, one, this doesn't create any new work, new obligation, nothing like that. But a minute ago, he said, and again, I wrote it down because I thought it was, a very catchy rhetorical remark, that the price of democracy is not too high. That is what Representative Niska said, which I don't know if he thinks the price is zero at this point. Doesn't seem like he would say the price of democracy is not too high if the price is $0. The price must be higher than $0, which means that under our House rules, it may be inconvenient, but under our House rules, this bill needs to go to Ways and Means. I urge a yes vote.
Members, as a reminder, the motion before the body is to refer this bill to Ways and Means. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 65 yeas, 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. Further discussion. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. So this is the Republican caucus's very first bill on the floor this year. It's the very first bill, and it was rushed through and skipped the process and all of that. But members, we just came out of an election where I think many of our constituents were really concerned about costs. They're concerned about the economy. And what does this bill have to do with the price of eggs? What does this bill have to do with the price of eggs? Madam Speaker, there's a lot of noise in the chamber.
Members, please take your conversation to the alcoves or in the retiring room.
It's very early in the session for members to have already abandoned listening to debate on bills. Maybe you've already just made up your minds and you don't care to listen, but it would be nice if people would. So, especially since this is the very first bill, what does it have to do with the price of eggs? Well, what does it have to do with the price of gas or housing or any of the price issues that Minnesotans are concerned about? Well, nothing really, or at least nothing good. So what this bill does is it forces the Attorney General's office to give out information that impairs its ability to do its job. Now, I want to remind everyone listening that the Attorney General is the people's lawyer. The Attorney General helps Minnesotans afford their lives. That office stands up to big business, to big interests on behalf of ordinary Minnesotans to help them afford their lives. And our current Attorney General, Keith Ellison, has carried out that mission very well. His job is to level the playing field, as I said, to stand up to those big interests. And in the current environment, he's doing that, and he's often doing it in connection with other states, with the attorneys general from other states. So what House File 20 does is try to stop the Attorney General from doing just that. It's helping big corporations be able to paw through Attorney General data at the very same time that on the national level, we have an unelected, unaccountable billionaire who is pawing through the data of Americans. Our Attorney General is protecting important data, oftentimes data that businesses want protected. And he's doing it so that he can do his job. Now, I heard some speculation about that the Attorney General is doing something that Minnesotans need to know about and so on and so on. But you know, every attack on the AGO right now is pure speculation. But there is something that is not speculation, and that is the results that Keith Ellison has been able to get for Minnesotans as he has been doing his job, trying to help them afford their lives. And I'm going to just read you a few of those results that Attorney General Ellison has been able to get for Minnesotans. In November of '24, he announced a $49 million settlement in a generic drug price-fixing litigation. In October of '24, he shut down fraudulent debt settlement companies and secured over $1 million in refunds for customers. In January of this year, he reached a settlement with sham nonprofits.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker.
Representative Scott.
What issue are we on? I think we're on House File 20. We're talking about a two-word bill. But instead, I feel like we're getting a promo for Keith Ellison.
Members, I will remind you to keep your conversation and debate confined to the issues before the body. We are on discussion to the third reading of House File 20. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and the representative knows that this is about the Attorney General's office. That's what the introduction of the bill was about. Notwithstanding that it's two words, it does a lot. It opens up a lot of data that is currently private under the law. That is what this bill does. And it prevents the Attorney General from doing the things he's been doing for Minnesotans to help them afford their lives, including some of the ones I've already mentioned. And I don't know why we want to stop Minnesotans from hearing what the Attorney General has been doing for them with the data situation the way it is currently under law, and which this bill would interrupt, and that is the relevancy here. So, in January, he reached a settlement with a sham nonprofit and its founder over violations of the Minnesota Nonprofit Corporation Act. Also in January, he secured $35 Novo Nordisk insulin for Minnesotans. In December of '24, he won restitution for workers that gig work companies had misclassified. In October of '24, he helped secure tens of millions of dollars in refunds for Xcel Energy customers. And in October of '24, he reached a data breach settlement with Marriott in which Marriott agreed to pay $52 million nationally and $800,000 to Minnesota. And these are just a few of the lawsuits and the wins that the Attorney General's office has been able to reach on behalf of Minnesotans. And these are not speculative. These are things that we know have happened and are continuing to happen. And at this time, as I said, when we need people to stand up to unelected billionaires pawing through their data in Washington, Keith Ellison is doing exactly that, and standing up for other illegal activities that are taking place from the Trump administration. And so it's no wonder that some in this chamber might want to stop him and throw roadblocks in his way. So what does this have to do with the price of eggs? Well, absolutely nothing, except if it does, it's nothing good. Because stopping the Attorney General from working for Minnesotans by opening up data and letting people paw through it and use it for no good purpose, but to stop the Attorney General from doing his work, that does raise costs for Minnesotans, whether it's eggs or gas or housing or drugs or any of many other things. So members, vote no on this very bad bill. There is no reason to vote to hurt Minnesotans by voting for this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Members, did you hear what Representative Liebling said? She said this is the Republicans' first bill. Yeah, thanks a lot, Democrats. We haven't had many bills here heard in the last 2 years, and fortunately and unfortunately the last 6 years, thanks to you. This bill is a very important bill. It sheds light on the Attorney General's and their transparency, and that he can't hide behind the law. For the last 2 years in the trifecta, hardly any Republican bills have been heard. You've shut us out. And the cost of eggs, that has nothing to do with this bill. But I'm glad you brought it up, Representative Liebling. After you guys squandered $18 billion surplus, raised taxes by $10 billion, and increased the state budget by 38%, went from a $52 billion budget to almost a $72.3 billion budget. What does that do to the price of eggs, Representative Liebling? What does that do to the price of gasoline, Representative Liebling? What does that do to the cost of housing, Democrats? It does a lot. It increased a lot. And I've been here for 14 years, and the last 2 years was an absolute insult to the Republicans. We were shut out completely. I didn't have one bill hearing in any of the committees I was in, and I was a GOP lead in labor and industry. Many of my colleagues were lucky to have a bill hearing. Thank the good Lord that we're, well, I wish I'd thank the good Lord we have the majority right now, but many of our members are over there asking for your signatures, and you're over here asking for our signatures, because that's what Minnesota wants. They want us to work together to do what's best for Minnesota. And Representative Niska's bills does just that. It sheds transparency on the Attorney General's office. And who doesn't want transparency? It's a rhetorical question, Representative Nash. We all want transparency. And his bill is a very good bill for a start. And this will be one of many bills heard by Republicans this year, because we've been shut out for the last 2, arguably you could say the last 6 years. My friends on the other side, your bills will get hearings too. Your bills will be on the House floor, because we have to work together to get 68 votes. That's what Minnesotans want. This is your opportunity to show Minnesota that you want the Attorney General's office to have transparency. You want to shed light on where the money is being spent, and not to be circumventing the law that we pass and legislate. Madam Speaker, I am honored that we Republicans will finally be heard and not shut out. We won't shut you guys out. Don't shut us out. Vote yes on this bill.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So people do have a right to know what's really going on here. I want to explore this a little bit. This bill arises from a lawsuit that energy policy advocates lost. Energy policy advocates is a front group for the fossil fuel industry. This lawsuit that they lost was initiated to disadvantage our Attorney General in another lawsuit that started in 2020, where he is trying to hold ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, and the American Petroleum Institute accountable for systematically, over several decades, deceiving Minnesotans about the true causes and costs of climate change. Last week, Minnesota judge ruled that that lawsuit could go forward. What's happening here? They're worried. They don't want to be held accountable. And it appears they've figured out a way to get a bill in front of us that would do their bidding. Let's be clear what this bill is. In a time when our economy is unfair to everyone but the wealthy, when our federal government is making it worse, this is seeking to put our thumbs on the scale in favor of greedy and wildly profitable fossil fuel companies that continue to value their profits over the health of the planet now and the planet that we leave for our kids and grandkids. These companies knew about climate change as far back as the 1960s and 1970s and knew it was going to dangerously overheat our planet. And they made deliberate decisions to mislead, to lie, and aggressively fund climate misinformation. A peer-reviewed study released in 2023 in Science cited internal ExxonMobil documents showing that as far back as 1977, the company's scientists were predicting the future trajectory of global warming correctly and skillfully. Another 2023 federal report released finds that extreme, by the way, it's costing us too, right? What's happening is that a 2023 report found that these things have causing events in the US $150 billion each year. That estimate doesn't account for the loss of life, for healthcare related costs, and damages to ecosystem services. That's the cost across the country. Now, in Minnesota, since 1970, the average daily temperatures across the state in January have increased by 8.9 degrees, and low temperatures on average are 10.8 degrees higher than they were a half century ago, during the time that ExxonMobil knew. According to the Insurance Federation, in 1998, Minnesota's homeowners insurance average was 300.
State your point of order.
Madam Speaker, I rise under Mason Section 124, subsection 1. In debate, a member must confine remarks to the proposal before the House and also avoid personalities. Your rant has nothing to do with the subject of the bill. So I would encourage, Madam Speaker, that we encourage Representative Kraft to sort of scooch back into the center lane and talk about the actual subject of the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Members, I will remind you
Madam
to keep
Speaker, advice.
Advice. State your point of advice.
Point of order that has been raised. Points of order are not to be raised to cut off debate that you don't like. A point of order is to be raised when you actually have a basis to make a point of order. Representative Kraft is talking about a lawsuit that gives rise to the exact bill in front of us. We have the right to know what that lawsuit was about, who brought it, and who lost. It's directly relevant to this discussion on this bill. And I don't think we want to go down the path of interrupting one another every time we don't like what somebody's saying with a point of order.
Members, let me remind you to keep your discussion and debate confined to the matter before the body. We are on the final passage, third reading of House File 20. Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'll remind that this lawsuit was initiated to disadvantage the Attorney General on another lawsuit where he is trying to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable. This is directly applicable to that because this would disadvantage that. And the cost to Minnesota of this is substantial if we allow this to go forward. Our homeowners insurance have gone from 35th highest in the country to 12th highest because extreme weather in Minnesota, we are the second most in the nation, severe weather. It's gone from $348 an average to almost $1,500 in 2020. And the Insurance Federation will tell you it's caused by climate change. Last year, flooding that, among other things, severely damaged the Rapidan Dam. The air pollution from forest fires, don't we remember when we had to stay inside due to that? Members, the bill for these fossil fuel companies' deceit and greed is coming due. We are paying it now, and the costs are going up. This is an easy vote. Please vote no on this for Minnesotans, and so the Attorney General can hold these companies accountable that have caused so much damage to our world, to our state, and so they can help pay for the damage they've caused, and the bill doesn't fall in Minnesota, just on Minnesotans.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't even know where to follow up after that. I mean, I just find it really hilarious, a lot of it, especially the whole interrupting. I remember many times us standing up here and we're speaking and we get interrupted. The point of order, as a matter of fact, it became a joke for me. Like, that was then, this is now, yes. Interesting how rules change. Back to the bill at hand, I'm all about transparency, Representative Niska. I think this is a great bill, and I find it really interesting that we are, in this body, there's plenty of people defending hiding information from the public. That to me is concerning and raises a red flag. We want to talk about unelected billionaires. Did you know that Alex Soros is really good friends with Keith Ellison? Yes, on Instagram there's a beautiful photo of those two hugging each other, and Alex Soros says, with one of America's greatest leaders and a dear friend, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who then also, I believe it was in 2018, received from the Soros family $100,000 to the pro-Ellison
State your point of order.
Madam Speaker, Masons 124 personalities are not permitted in debate. This is not talking about the work of the Attorney General's office. This is speaking to the Attorney General as an individual.
Members, I will remind you again, please keep your conversation and debate limited to the discussion before us, House File 20. Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Yes, so Keith Ellison is very good friends with the unelected billionaire who has also donated to Keith Ellison's campaign. We're very concerned about the price of eggs suddenly in this body, and members, after having an $18 billion surplus 2 years ago, we are now facing over a $5 billion deficit, but yet the body here, Democrats, want to focus everything on Washington, D.C. and not take ownership for the distraught and the pain families are feeling in their own wallets today. Members, this is a good bill. This is a bill that sheds sunlight on the AG's office, and I encourage a green vote. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today not to spend 7.5 hours talking about hamburgers, which none of those points of orders when we're going to talk about bills, but to talk about the concerns I have about how this bill will undermine Minnesota's proud tradition of protecting consumers, small businesses, and workers. And we need that more than ever. Minnesotans are being nickeled and dimed, overcharged, and underpaid. And I think we hear about it in all of our committees. We're all both talking about it today. Unchecked corporate power that's stealing the livelihoods and the economic autonomy of workers, of small businesses, of family farmers, and the next generation. And in the last few years, we've made great strides as a state on protecting consumers, protecting high road businesses from price gouging, from anti-competitive behavior that's driving up prices for Minnesotans. It's squeezing small businesses, and it's sending farmers out of business. And a big part of that is that we have an Attorney General's office that has been focused on working with consumers, working with small businesses and Minnesotans, and small businesses who are filing complaints, giving information, and helping build the case on behalf of the people of Minnesota to uphold our consumer laws, our antitrust laws, and our protections. And this bill puts a big part of that in jeopardy. So let me explain how we get to that 7.5 hours we were spent talking on our favorite subject in a 1.5-page bill, hamburgers. I learned that day that there are many people in this building who love hamburgers. Representative O'Driscoll, Representative Baker, Representative Nash, and Representative Lawrence. If I started talking about the hamburgers that you listed, we'd be here all night, and I don't want to keep you here all night. Why does this have to do with hamburgers? The high road businesses, let's just take an example. Your local hamburger joint in Representative O'Driscoll's district. Let's say McDonald's moves in and tries to muscle out their local supplier, the folks they use to get their meat, their beef. And that local hamburger joint reaches out to the Attorney General's office, gives information about McDonald's and about that anti-competitive behavior. When that investigation closes, that hamburger joint's complaint and that information they provide could be shared with the public. Or take the mom and pop grocery store down the block that the hamburger joint uses to get its Heinz ketchup for those burgers. That local grocery store is getting tired of being squeezed by multinational suppliers, and they reach out to the attorneys at the Attorney General's office to file a complaint. That information of that mom and pop grocery store could be made public to their supplier, who could retaliate using their market power. Or take the family farm that supplies that beef for those hamburger patties, and they offer evidence of price-fixing schemes that they suspect are going on for their feed and seed suppliers. That information, too, could be public when that investigation is done. Talk to those lawyers at the Attorney General's office. These small businesses are terrified of talking about this because they are taking on some of the biggest corporations, not just in the country, but in the world. The idea that this information could get out there chills their participation. It potentially jeopardizes investigations, and it hurts our ability as a state to take on these monopolies. Now, like my colleagues, I was sort of surprised that the first bill on the floor was not about leveling the playing field for workers, families, and small businesses. This bill does nothing to make groceries more affordable, to make housing more affordable, to make childcare more affordable. And in fact, it actually will impede some of the most important pieces of litigation that are trying to lower costs by unrigging our economy. This bill will make your hamburger more expensive and our economy less fair. Members, vote no.
The member from Minoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was just getting ready to go get some popcorn, but I will give my speech here just a second. So it's an interesting discussion we're having here. I find it really troubling, for one, that the issue of how data is classified and the whole Data Practices Act used to be very, very bipartisan in nature. And it's become so much less so in recent years. And that's really, actually, it's pretty heartbreaking, because government transparency, especially, it matters. And I think it's interesting. I just wanted to read a little bit of what Justice Thiessen said in his 23-page dissent. Now, he used to be a member of this body. He served on the Civil Law Committee at one point, and he had an interest in this subject. And this is just in the opening, in the opening paragraph, about halfway through, and he said, I find it hard to understand how data can be private data on individuals when it is not data on individuals. Think about that. I'll read it again. I find it hard to understand how data can be private data on individuals when that data is not on individuals. So how can it be what he's saying, and he goes on in his dissent to make a chart that shows how data is classified when it's public, non-public, private. And this case was not about an individual. This case was about a corporation. So that is why his sentence is so pointed. Again, let me find it again. I find it hard to understand how data can be private data on individuals when it is not data on individuals. He goes on to say, why would the legislature have used the word individuals if it meant for section 1365, or 1365, which is the data practices section on the Attorney General, to cover data that was not on individuals? Only a lawyer could take delight in pondering that question and reaching the result the court reaches today. Other Minnesotans will be scratching their heads. So rather than scratch your heads, and some of you have been around here long enough to know better, right? Representative Liebling, you've been around here a long time. I went back and, everybody has this newfound, all of a sudden this section of 1365 is just terrible, it's just horrible, it's going to cause pain. But it's been around for 40 years, and I went back and I couldn't find any bills that have been introduced in the last 30 years that want to change this area of statute. And Representative Stevenson, to your comment, and trying to make fun of, I guess, Representative Niska's price, the price of democracy. I can tell you how much the price of democracy is in this case, the same as it was before the case was solved the wrong way by the Supreme Court. Exact same price. And I want you to know that the Attorney General's office would be the only law enforcement agency, and it's our chief law enforcement agency for the people. He'd be the only one where inactive investigation would no longer be public. So not only could we not find out if they whether they decided to take up a case or not, and why or why not they took it, but after an investigation is over, you can't find out anything about what went into the investigation. Now, maybe there might be some information in there that might be helpful for the public, for the news media. But no, we're not going to have access to it. The Attorney General, he gets to hold everything in secret. Members, we, the legislature, are in charge of classifying data. This is our job. It's not the Supreme Court's decision, it's not the Supreme Court's purview to decide that for us. We have decided it. And in fact, 40 years ago, there was a similar ask by a citizen of the AG's office, and the Department of Administration did an opinion. They wrote an opinion on that issue, and they found that this area of law was totally lawful. So 40 years ago, it was already tested, and now here we are again. This isn't like it's some gotcha bill, okay? This is good governance, and everybody in this room should be in favor of that. If we want to get to the issues of fraud and government waste and government oversight, we're not going to be able to have oversight in the Attorney General's office. He's going to be able to hide more information than the governor's office or any other executive branch office and any other law enforcement agency. Now, if you're okay with that, just remember when you vote today that this may come back to bite you eventually. Please vote for the Niska bill.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As has been noted, this is the very first bill that the GOP has picked. You could have picked any bill at all, and this is the first one. And instead of reducing the costs of housing or childcare or eggs, we have a bill that is a political attack on the Attorney General's office and their ability to stand up for consumers, to confront fraud, and to attack climate change. I'm going to give one example of why this is such a bad bill. We heard that this doesn't impact individual data, but it surely does. There are many farmers, for example, who organize as LLCs. And those farmers, let's just take an example, there might be an egg farmer who has a contract to purchase chickens and then sell the eggs back, And perhaps they're worried about anti-competitive practices from the conglomerates that they're buying from. They're worried about price fixing. So they go to the Attorney General's office and they try to report this. Why would they not want that data public, Representative Scott? Because they are worried that that might get back to the conglomerate that they are buying from and might put them in jeopardy. And so they do not want that data to be public. There is good public policy reason why that data shouldn't be public. And there is also a good reason why the Attorney General's office wants to enforce in cases like that, because they do not want there to be price fixing. They want to stand up for consumers. And what would be the result? Well, those eggs would be cheaper. So this bill is actually making eggs more expensive by not allowing for some of this data to be protected. We have seen also, it was stated that this bill is to prevent efforts like the ones that we saw to tackle climate change that Attorney General Ellison was taking on. And that is the point of this bill. The point of this bill is to stop the multi-state litigation efforts that the Attorney General has taken on with other states to be able to stand up for consumers, to stand up for our citizens. And so that includes the litigation on climate change, where we are trying to take back for the state some of the gains that ExxonMobil and other companies have extracted from our citizens as a result of their role in causing climate change. It is also going after efforts like the multi-state settlement on opioids that won $565 million for the state. This is going to treatment. This is going to remediation for Minnesota citizens right now. These are the types of efforts that would be jeopardized if this data was put at risk. And the proponents know it. That is the point. Those are the types of efforts that they are trying to stop, because those are the efforts that would help citizens. But who do they hurt? Well, they hurt large corporate interests. They hurt ExxonMobil. They hurt the groups that stood up and funded the lawsuit that was in question before the Supreme Court, which was coal interests. It was a front group for the coal industry that went up to the Supreme Court. Those are the interests that our colleagues across the aisle are standing up for in this particular case. If we wanted to look seriously at the question of data privacy and how the laws are drafted, you had that opportunity. In committee, Representative Liebling offered to have that conversation with you. Representative Feist offered to work with you on a bipartisan basis to be able to see if we can make the law more clear about the language, to try to get at some of the public policy goals perhaps that you have here, but you didn't take us up on that. In fact, you rushed the bill to the floor, skipping committee stops, ignoring the request for a fiscal note. And why? So you could get here and not have 68 votes? We have opportunities to work together, members, but the only reason it seems is this is a partisan bill with an effort to try to score political points, and that is a shame. So I would urge us to vote no.
I recognize the author of the bill, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. As we debate this fundamental issue of our form of government, we do so under the portrait of President Lincoln. And his words in the Gettysburg Address should remind us of our duty, our fundamental duty to protect and preserve government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that democratic form of government requires sunlight. It has been said that democracy dies in darkness. And that's what we've heard defended on the other side of the aisle today. More darkness, more secrecy in the Attorney General's office. So if you're for democracy, if you think that's important, to take up in the first bill of the legislative session, you'll vote yes. If you care about the people's right to know what's being done in their name, in their Attorney General's office, by the people's attorney, by the people's lawyer, you'll vote yes. But if your party bosses tell you to vote no, and you listen to them, then that's what you're going to do, and that sure would be a shame. We've heard democracy denigrated and darkness defended in a deflection and distraction strategy. And there have been a few tricks, and I think it's important to call them out. We've heard one over and over again in the last few weeks. Whenever Democrats don't want to talk about their record, whenever Democrats don't want to talk about what's actually happening in Minnesota, the $18.5 billion surplus that's been turned into a $5 billion deficit, the increase in the price of eggs and oil and everything, gas at the gas pump. We've heard the Trump deflection strategy, and we've heard that again today. This bill isn't about Donald Trump. This bill is about our democracy in Minnesota. It's about the right of the people of Minnesota to know what our people's lawyer is doing. That's what this bill is about, and Republicans are going to vote for the people. And I've been told, and I was just told by the floor leader for the Democratic Party, that the Democrats are going to vote for their party bosses. That's a shame. We've heard deflection and distraction about particular bad people who maybe want to know. Well, all the people of Minnesota have a right to know. It's not about the fossil fuel companies and whether you think they're bad. The same data practices tools that they get to use are the tools that you get to use. They're the tools that could be used to hold a Republican attorney general accountable if special interest groups on the other side of the aisle were influencing the attorney general's office. That is democracy. That is not partisan. This bill should not be partisan. It is only partisan for one reason. The Democratic Party is choosing to make it partisan to protect an office holder of their party who wants to hide information from the people of Minnesota. The other trick has been to repeat that officer's information he wants you to know. Great, let's look at his press releases. All the people of Minnesota have a right to see his press releases. But democracy isn't just about the press releases of those in power and what they want you to know. Democracy is about holding them accountable and knowing what's actually going on. There was almost an implied threat that the Attorney General isn't going to do the work to protect consumers, the work we would all agree on, if we don't let him do it in secret. I sure hope that's not the case. And if that is, the people of Minnesota have a right to know. And it's not about the small local hamburger joint or the local mom and pop business, although I really do appreciate the newfound concern for the corporate personhood of those small businesses. It's interesting, we just heard about that today. But the reality is the individual rights of every individual person, their privacy, is protected by this bill. What's not protected is what the Attorney General does, how the Attorney General is influenced by nonprofits, by corporations, by dark money funds, by rich billionaires who are trying to influence the Attorney General's office. This is a small change in the law, but Representative Stevenson, you're right, it is an important change. It's just as important as when you wanted to change a shall to may about the Attorney General's obligation to do fraud investigations. And the fraud investigations are an important part of why we need this information. The Attorney General's office under current law is the only investigative agency in Minnesota that gets to hide closed investigative data. So as we're talking about fraud issues, we are left only to guess what kind of fraud investigations have been closed and hidden by the Attorney General's office. And I thought it was great, Representative Liebling, that you talked about speculation, that all we're doing is speculating. That's right. All we can do about information that the Attorney General is hiding from the people of Minnesota is speculate about what that information is. Why is the Attorney General hiding information, and what is he hiding? The fact that we have to speculate is the problem. The fact that the people of Minnesota do not know what is being hidden from them is the problem. And the fact that 65 Democrats have committed, apparently, to vote no, that is the problem as well. But the real speculation that I've heard here today is, well, if the Attorney General has to be held accountable and has to be transparent, maybe somebody won't report something to the Attorney General's office, and then maybe the Attorney General's office won't do its job, and then maybe the Attorney General's office won't file a lawsuit, and maybe that lawsuit won't succeed and lower the price of eggs. That's the only speculation here, is the speculation by Democrats that democracy is bad for the people of Minnesota. Well, I have news, folks. Democracy, it's not perfect, but as Winston Churchill said, it's better than all the other systems. Democracy requires us to know what our government is doing. Democracy is important. It's important enough to be the first bill we vote on here today. Members, vote for democracy, vote for the people. You don't need to listen to your party bosses. Vote for the right of the people to know and hold their government accountable. Vote yes.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll.
Madam Speaker, Niska changes from aye to no.
Representative Niska changes from aye to no. There being 67 ayes and there being 66 ayes and 67 nays, the bill does not pass.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to reconsider and request a roll call.
A roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, I see 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a shame that Democrats could not vote for democracy today, but I move to reconsider so we can give them another shot.
Okay. Representative Niska has moved that the vote today where House File 20 was not passed will now be reconsidered. Is there discussion? Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the vote failed once, and we don't need it to fail again, so I'd ask members to vote no on the motion to reconsider.
Any further discussion? The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Being 67 ayes and 65 nays, the motion to reconsider prevails.
Madam Speaker.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to lay House File 20 on the table.
Representative Niska moves to move House File 20 and lay it on the table. That is a non-debatable motion. All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Next order of business is motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Bierman moves that House File number 1005 be recalled from the Committee on Health, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Human Services, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Bierman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is my motion. I have spoken with both committee chairs, and it's been approved. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
ACOM moves that House File number 1065 be recalled from the Committee on Capital Investment and be re-referred to the Committee on Taxes.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative ACOM.
Thank you. It's Hennepin County. I thank you. That is my motion. I would like to have House File 1065, which is a tax increment financing bill, moved from the Capital Investment Committee to the Tax Committee. I have spoken to both Chairs Franson and Chairs David, and they agree.
The member from Hennepin makes a motion to re-refer. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Liebling moves that House File number 1093 be recalled from the Committee on Human Service, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Health, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this is a bill that was misdirected to Human Services instead of to Health, Finance, and Policy. It has to do with a prescription drug purchasing program under medical assistance, which is clearly in health and not in human services. And I understand that Chair Becker is okay with the move. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Myers moves that House File number 177 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and be re-referred to the Committee on Housing, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is my motion. This is a bill to build more single-family homes, and we'd like to have it heard in the Housing Committee. I've spoken with both Chair Davids and Chair Igo, and they're okay with it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails.
Myers moves that House File number 178 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and be re-referred to the Committee on Housing, Finance, and Policy.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Myers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, this is a bill I'd like to refer from taxes to housing. This is to build more multifamily homes. I've spoken with both chairs, and they're okay with it.
Any discussion? All those in favor, aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Announcements. I recognize Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the Office of Legislative Audit Commission process is beginning for program evaluation. I have the forms here, and we did extend the deadline until Monday at the end of the day to give you time to fill out the application, make sure you're getting the topics in so we can begin that process of reviewing. For new members, the Office of Legislative Audit, the Legislative Audit Commission is bipartisan, equal number of Republicans and Democrats, equal number of House members and senators. And so it is Representative Quam, Representative Jacob, Representative Anderson P., Representative Greenman, Representative Lee F., and myself. If you have any questions about the Audit Commission, feel free to contact us. And again, if you'd like to fill out the form, I have them here. Thank you.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, February 24th, 2025.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, February 24th, 2025. All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until Monday, 3:30 p.m., February 24th, 2025.